Americans have taken to the streets to demand change. But what changes are possible? What would really matter? And a man suddenly in the very hot spotlight is the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, who happens to be native Detroiter Keith Ellison. We'll talk with him. Today is Sunday, June 7th, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Had the calendar not been upended by the coronavirus pandemic, we would be getting ready for the big unveilings at the North American International Auto Show today. People from all over the world would be here for the first edition of the show, not being held in the dead of winter. But those plans, like so many others, feel like they collapsed ages ago. And of course, even COVID-19 has been nudged from the headlines by the protests that have roiled cities big and small across the nation. The fissures first gave way in Minneapolis, and there has been plenty of criticism aimed not only at the four officers who were on the scene as George Floyd drew his last breath, but also of the way the law enforcement community handled the matter immediately after, especially those first 2 or 3 days. This week, charges landed on the 3 officers who watched it happen, announced by the state's Attorney General Keith Ellison. Ellison is a Detroit native who still has very strong ties to our city, and he's going to join me in just a minute to talk about the case and about a way forward. And speaking of that, the many protesters are all calling for change, but what change exactly? Since we seem incapable of controlling the way people think and feel, what are the concrete, defined steps we can take to create real change in law enforcement? A few years ago, a national commission put together just such a list. We're going to dig into that today. And Kimberly Gill is going to share part of her conversation with a group of African-American mothers. What are they telling their children? It's all today on Flashpoint. Detroiter Keith Ellison understands the spotlight. When he ran for the U.S. House in Minnesota, he became the first ever Muslim American elected to Congress. If he thought he was stepping out of the limelight when he left Congress and became Minnesota's Attorney General, it didn't exactly work out. He is back in national focus, now heading the case against the 4 Minneapolis officers who sparked such national outrage. And Attorney General Ellison is kind enough to talk to his hometown this morning from his office in St. Paul. Attorney General Ellison, thank you so much. It's good to have you with me this morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I want to start with the unusual nature this situation this must be for Minneapolis, St. Paul. Long kind of seen as a vanguard of liberal thinking in America, everything from Hubert Humphrey to Paul Wellstone, and the city that gave us Prince in Paisley Park. It must strike you as very odd that it is now seen as the epicenter of what's happening in America.
Well, the truth is, Minneapolis is a wonderful city, but it also has another sort of experience for African-American people. Not all, but many. I could tell you it's somewhat of a tale of 2 cities. And you have people doing very well, a lot of prosperity and a lot of progressive ideas. But it also has disparities for African-Americans that are pretty dramatic. Say 70% of all Minnesotans own their own home, but only around a quarter of African Americans do. The average income is about $68,000 a year in Minnesota, but the average income for African Americans is hovering around $30,000 a year. So there are a lot of stark issues when it comes to racial disparities. My argument is that if this can be a place for prosperity and happiness for white Minnesotans, it can be for everybody, and we got to work hard to make that so, and we got real work to make sure that we close that gap.
You do have real work ahead. You've talked about how difficult this task is going to be as we move ahead with the case. Before we get to that, though, there's been a fair amount of Monday morning quarterbacking about the way that Minneapolis police handled this from the get-go. Even the Detroit chief, James Craig, has said if they just would have put the Officer Chauvin in handcuffs right away, the way we would have with a private citizen, if we had seen that video, that maybe things could have been different. Should it have been handled differently from the start?
You know what? I have to say, I really don't know. We have the facts that we have, and that's what we have to deal with. I will say that the chief, Madera Arredondo, is a reform-minded chief. He fired those 4 officers on the scene who are responsible, who have now subsequently been charged with second-degree murder. And he has been very clear about the duty to intervene and the duty to assist people who are in need. And so I'll say that Minneapolis Police Department has solid leadership, but we have a ways to go to really let some of those reforms get into the rank and file. And obviously, we got a lot of work to do given the outcome of about 11 days ago.
Well, and you have said now, trying this case won't be easy. Winning a conviction will be hard. Everyone is going to have to kind of go to school here a little bit on Minnesota law, which I'm told by a former U.S. attorney is kind of unusual against the way that maybe people might expect this to go, and that the statutes are written, it's kind of tough to prosecute a police officer.
Well, it's that way all over the country. I mean, let me remind you, we all saw what happened to Freddie Gray, and we saw the video, and we saw everything. We thought, okay, we know what's going to happen here. Well, there was not one single conviction in that case. Or what about Walter Scott in South Carolina? The officer, he was running away and was shot in the back multiple times. That jury hung at the state level, and the feds had to come in and prosecute to get a conviction. Why stop there? Philando Castile was shot on Facebook live stream in front of us. And that case ended in acquittal. And of course, we all remember Rodney King. Not we all don't, but people you and I's age remember it. And, that case, that Simi Valley verdict, acquitted. So these cases are not easy. Many cases, there was never even any charge. There was no bill of indictment in the Mike Brown case. There was no bill of indictment in the Eric Garner case. So these cases are not easy. And so it's important for people to understand that, because we look at the video and we're like, it couldn't be more clear. What's the problem? Well, the problem is it's a complicated thing, set of features of our system, which I think up until now have led to the under-prosecution of excessive force by police.
Well, shouldn't we rightly worry about what the reaction of Americans would be if that officer somehow is not convicted?
I'm not going to absorb that pressure. I'm going to put every cell of my being into obtaining convictions that are supported by the facts and the law. And we're going to do our best at every single link of the prosecutorial chain. And then, we're going to put it in hands of the jury. Now, I have confidence that Minnesotans will do the right thing and enforce the law and find guilt, because I wouldn't have charged this case out unless I believed that. But ultimately, this will be a decision by a jury, most likely, and therefore, we'll see. Yeah.
Keith, as somebody who grew up in Detroit, you grew up in the most segregated metropolitan area in America. This many years later, you come to see the kind of week that we've just had across the country. I'm really curious about your reflections on where we are on the matter of race in America right now.
Well, for 243 years, African Americans were held as property. For 100 years after that, we were held as second-class citizens, including in the North, like Detroit and Minneapolis. And it's only been about 55 years that we have not had state-sanctioned suppression of Black people. Only about 55 years of anything else. And then since that time, we've had disparities in every aspect of American life, from police and criminal justice, incarceration, education, economics, jobs, housing, everything. And so we have yet to really reach that liberty and justice for all goal. And this moment that we're in, I hope, makes everyone of all colors, Black, white, Latino, Asian, everybody, say that we want an America where it really is about the content of your character. That's really what this moment calls for. And that's what I'm going to do my part to advance.
As we've so long hoped. But this was really such a perfect cocktail of tragedy that we've got this horrible video that we've all watched, and too many of these kinds of cases. It happens against a backdrop where there is so much downward economic pressure right now because of COVID-19. And it saddens me to point out that you, in fact, lost your mother to coronavirus a couple of months ago, and you were back here in Detroit for the funeral. This just seems that this swell of all of these things around, in particular, the Black community, it's an awful lot to ask, isn't it?
Well, look, COVID-19 is not racist, but our healthcare system is. And so, it has a dramatically higher impact on African Americans than others who are generally under insured, who tend to have jobs that put them at greater risk of exposure, who have all these features which basically conspire to diminish Black life. But African Americans are nothing if not resilient, and with the help of our other fellow Americans, we're still moving, man. We're still up here kicking, and we will never rest until this country meets its potential of being a free, equal society. Yeah. We're committed to it, and we're not going to stop.
The last thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about, you mentioned earlier reforms that are needed, and I wanted to talk about actionable steps that we can take. It's really hard to get into the hearts and minds of people and change the way they think. Short of that, there must be some things that we can do to change, especially when it comes to law enforcement, to change the way that they interact with, especially African Americans, but the community at large. What are the concrete steps that you think we could take starting tomorrow that would make a difference?
Well, I think Congress needs to actually set up a system to calculate and to collect data on deadly force encounters and non-lethal use of force of American police. We need to have that system of data collection so we can really know what the scale of the problem is. We don't yet have that. The other thing we can do is empower chiefs of police and say, look, if there's misconduct on your police force, you're going to get rid of those people, or we're going to get rid of you. And and now, because so many agreements with the Police Federation sort of really handcuff the chiefs to really enforce discipline, it's really a problem. There are chiefs who fired officers for excessive force and who've gotten restored because of an arbitrator's decision. We need to empower the chiefs. We do need to do a lot more things with training. In Camden County, New Jersey, they have used body cam to do simulation and do regular training and simulation, so they don't just have a skills course and then send somebody out with a gun. Yeah. They have an ongoing course that allows people to really get better as they do the work.
Lastly, Keith, as your state's top law enforcement officer, I'm curious as you look out at the lawlessness that we've seen break out with all of this, the vandalism and the looting. You've already described a certain sympathy that you clearly have for the sentiments behind all this. Or do you have sympathy for the lawlessness that's gone along with it, or has that got to stop because it's clogging up the message?
Let me tell you, I have sympathy for the peaceful demonstrators. People who are committing arson are not helping the cause. In fact, they're hurting it. I'm not at all sure that is their intent. We've seen some very suspicious characters lighting fires and breaking windows that don't seem to be at all even a part of the protest. But I will say that the peaceful protesters have raised the issue up so that maybe our society can really deal with it. Now, and it will be time soon to really begin to finish the job that the protesters did so well to raise. We do need to get people together and to engage in reform. As it relates to the arsonists and the looters, these people, I mean, what sense does it make to go out and loot and burn down stuff and hurt people who you're doing it to? Yeah. In the name of somebody who was hurt? If you really object to what happened to George Floyd, you would never do that to another person. You never victimize another person. And so I cannot stand with that behavior. But for the peaceful protesters, nothing but love.
Attorney General Ellison, I know that you have a million requests of your time right now. I'm so glad you had some time for your hometown today. I know you get back here quite a bit, and here's looking forward to the next time we're together in person. Thank you so much, Keith.
Yes, sir. See you soon.
You bet. Keith Ellison, the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. We come back, we'll talk more about those concrete steps. What can we do? Are there steps that can be taken? This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Trends come and go, but luxury is always in style. During National Kerosene Month, receive a rebate of up to $1,000 on timeless kerosene styles. Elevate your decor with sophisticated designs and remarkable quality, including carpets steeped in a century of kerosene craftsmanship, as well as kerosene's brand new luxury vinyl and elevated wood, offering beautiful wood look flooring that is better than nature intended. Don't miss your chance to live beautifully on kerosene, only at Independent Carpet One.
Knowledgeable, experienced, high-powered, connected. Mario Morrow and Associates is a trusted media and public relations firm. When you need a company that understands your vision and knows your industry, consider Mario Morrow and Associates. We'll help you win with strategic marketing, image building, digital and social media, and crisis management. Contact Mario Morrow and Associates, where success rules and results matter. Learn more at mariomorrow.com.
To acknowledge it, you also have to acknowledge that you see color.
To say that you don't see color is actually offensive because you need to acknowledge that we all have differences.
Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and I was like, okay, nope, yeah, you can't go running.
I don't want to hear that white people are uncomfortable anymore. It's not comfortable for us to tell our 14-year-old sons that they can't go out and be 14-year-old boys.
Welcome back. So what kind of concrete steps can be taken to stop the bleeding of this wound that just does not heal? Several years ago, President Obama launched an effort to find the actionable steps that needed taking in our criminal justice system, and a senior policy advisor on the White House Domestic Policy Council was Malanka Clark, now in Detroit as the CEO of the Hudson Weber Foundation, and she's with me now after coming off of that task force, which was called COPS, Community-Oriented Policing Services. Malanka, I really appreciate your time. Before we get into these actionable steps I want to talk about, I want to start, though, with how resistant to change you have found systems to be, whether they're public or private, but especially in the public world. It seems to be sometimes difficult to get change to be embraced.
I agree with that. It's tremendously hard work. I think and as we're seeing now with sort of these issues raised again into the national consciousness, it does seem to take a literal kind of ground shifting beneath our feet for folks to commit to making the changes that are needed. And even then, you know, obviously the verdict is out until we get on the other side of it. There's been talk before and not always follow through. Well,
that's really true. These are sort of in a laboratory setting in our heads right now. But let's talk about some of the things that you think, especially after we've watched so much videotape of things gone wrong. Where do we start? What would help and be really actionable if we could change tomorrow?
Yeah, so I'm pleased to join you today with the you mentioned at the top of the intro, the work that I was able to do with the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. It was then President Obama, and I was with the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, serving as Chief of Staff to that task force. That report and concrete recommendations was written in 2015. And here we are in 2020. Yeah. Those problems that report addressed have not been. We still see the incidents like the one with George Floyd that brings so many of us to the table today. I would say that to talk about policing specifically, one of the things that's particularly hard is changing the culture. And there are many different aspects to that, but certainly the way departments recruit staff, the way folks are trained in terms of how they're engaging with the community, and the accountability mechanisms are what can really make the change that, you know, I would assume we both would like to see occur. And specifically with the George Floyd incident, I think the thing that was, you know, it was so horrifying to see that image. But what was so particularly disturbing was the brazenness with which the officer was looking at spectators of what he was doing. And I think that speaks to, you know, it's not about changing hearts and minds. Someone like that is who they are. But what you can tell was he did not expect to be held accountable for those actions. And that's why that's the most important piece, that accountability piece.
The other thing, the old saying being that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We also saw other officers surrounding the scene and not doing anything, not responding. That's why they're now charged. But that also speaks to the culture that's inside a lot of police departments that are sort of insular, and it just is seen as wrong to sort of step against one of your colleagues in the field.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. and what a failure to see.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt. Yeah, it's okay. But we've seen this list that's been making the rounds on the internet, the 8 can't wait. And these are 8 steps that I think in many ways are born out of your findings from back from the work that you did. And they include things like banning chokeholds at all, requiring de-escalation rather than a ratcheting up of it. And one of them is this duty to intervene when you see an officer acting improperly.
Yeah, I have seen those recommendations, and I love that they have that specificity and concreteness to them, so that folks can't throw up their hands and say, well, what is it that can be done? I think they're informed and solid, and I would actually note that one of the people behind Campaign Zero who put out those recommendations was actually a task force member on the president's task force, and that's Brittany Packman, a community activist. I would say, just to kind of connect the dots, I think that, the one thing to be thoughtful of as these policies are brought to bear is to ensure that any department, as they consider how they are serving their community, right, not just occupying the community, but is to make sure those policies are informed by the community that they serve. And I think that if departments authentically saw that as their mandate, and had their use of force policies, many of which are outlined, many of the recommendations in the 8 can't wait are use of force policies. If those could be informed by the community, we would get to a place where we would have meaningful and accountable guidance for officers as they operate in the streets and as they serve the communities that they ought to protect.
Lastly, so if we change the handbook a little bit, how do we change people's hearts and minds? That's a lot trickier a thing to pull off. I'm going to assume that with all of your work, especially now at Hudson Weber, this is something you've thought about. How do we really change the way that people think in America?
Yeah, there's a saying, and it's often said around police culture that, but it's true in many environments, that culture eats policy for lunch, right?
Yes.
Sort of the tip of the iceberg is what you say you do, and all below the water are sort of those things that inform what actually happens. It's hard work. Training obviously is key, and there's use of force training that is absolutely important. But there are also other types of training, fair and impartial policing training, procedural justice training, and that's an interesting one. I know when I was working with the task force, was interested to hear that the way that officers are treated within police departments, if they think that they're treated fairly, if the decisions that are made are transparent, if folks are held accountable for when they do things wrong and they see that that's visible to their community, that absolutely informs how they then operate externally outside of the department. But that culture, the culture that lives inside the department, will absolutely inform what happens on the outside, and that's
Malenka, I so appreciate your time. I look forward to more conversations on this very topic in the near future, and stay safe. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. We'll be joined by my partner Kimberly Gill on Flashpoint right after this.
As temperatures skyrocket and your AC feels the pressure, now is the perfect time to insulate. Don't suffer through a hot house and high energy bills. Insulate now and cut your energy bill up to 50% with Ace & Sons.
Call today and get 15% off installation.
The COVID-19 crisis has been the greatest challenge I've faced as a nurse, but I've never been prouder of my Beaumont teammates for helping to lead Michigan through it.
Now we're pleased to say we're open for all your medical needs.
Whether your screening or procedure was postponed or you're in need of care now, our Beaumont team has created a safe environment for you.
At Beaumont, there's no quit in us.
And you can be confident
we'll take great care of you.
We stayed home and we stayed apart, but most importantly, we just stayed. And our Suburban Collection family of 3,500 team members strong has had the honor of serving this community for the last 70 years. And now it's time to get back to work.
Our service bays are open, our sales consultants are available online, and our showrooms are now open once again.
Because we're the Suburban Collection and we are here for you. Today, tomorrow, always.
Recent statistics show a large percentage of Michiganders can save over $1,000 a year by refinancing. Call 248-308-5000 or chat with us online at davidhallmortgage.com. Lower payments, better options, more personal attention.
Make sure you're with us tomorrow on Local 4 News. My partner, Kimberly Gill, recently sat down with a group of African-American mothers for a candid conversation about the conversation they're having with their children. Kim is with us now. And KG, tell me a little bit about why you wanted to have this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have, Devin, because I am raising a black son, and eventually I will have to have a conversation about race with him. It's a conversation that my parents had to have with me at an early age, their parents them. And I think it's also something that white Americans need to know about the conversations they should be having with their children as well. So I hope you'll join us.
Now let's listen to a part of it.
Some parents have been quite forthcoming, and they've shared with me that the moment that they heard of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, they had conversations with their children at the dinner table. And that was not something that I had to request. That was something that they felt very comfortable sharing with me, and that warmed my heart. So they need acknowledgement and then conversation.
Yeah, Petra, you agree?
I agree with that 100%. I was going to bring that up. To say that you don't see color is actually offensive, because you need to acknowledge that we all have differences. It's just a matter if there are racist differences, and not acknowledging that our experience in this country is very different than that of a white American.
So it's going to air on Monday at 5 and 11. It's a real candid conversation. It's for everybody. I hope you'll join us.
I'm really looking forward to it. Kim, thanks for spending time with us here today on Flashpoint. Thank you for being here as well. I hope you have a great, safe week, and we'll see you next time right back here for Flashpoint.